Perfect. All right. I'm going to do a little intro first, okay? First, I want to say thank you for participating and helping and doing your best to provide very constructive and very, if it's needed, targeted feedback towards this team. This proposal has come a long way from the original concept of about 9 months ago, but I don't think it's quite exactly where it needs to be right yet, which is I think everyone will agree if we read through this and hear through it. But it's actually in pretty good shape. It's coming together pretty well. So we all know who you're looking at and who's going to be asking questions. I know the team will be introducing themselves once we can start the presentation, correct?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. I'd like to just start and let you all know who all you're looking at. Because I'm Frank Cole, Director of the Gemstone Program.
I'm Kristen Skendel, the Associate Director of the Gemstone Program.
Go ahead.
I'm Dana Straight. I'm a postdoc working with Shihab and Jonathan. I got my PhD in a field looking at how music affects the nervous system.
Uh-huh.
And I have a background in music theory.
Perfect.
And I'm Shihab Shama, and I work in EE department, and I do work on auditory processing in the brain and music and language and stuff like
Okay.
Yeah, I'm Jonathan Fritz, and I got sort of roped up into coming here. I've been working with Shihab for about 15 years, and we study the brains of animals to try to understand how they process complex sound. And we got more interested in what happens when animals listen to some of the sort of primitives of music to see what's happening and where the evolution of music might be and music perception might be in animals.
So I'm Ramani Droswami, I'm professor in computer science and I'm their team mentor. I have mentioned your work to them, and in fact one of the, I believe, best performing algorithms in the Music Information Retrieval Conference recently used your features.
No.
Yeah, it covered last year.
I had no idea.
So
I guess I must have known.
So-
To tell me who it is.
yeah, you can sort of, and the team has been, the team is sophomores, and they've been different backgrounds. They'll introduce themselves when they sort of say their names. They'll also mention what their major is. And we've been looking through MATLAB, signal processing, and machine learning to give them some background. And they're very diligent, so take it away.
Okay, before we start, the second time before we start, we're recording this. This is the first year we're blessed with the opportunity that the University Library System is granting research grants to teams based on their proposal presentations. So that's why everything's been recorded. And it's a competition of the top 3 presenters who demonstrate their use of library resources in learning how to populate the background information in the proposal the best. Hopefully you see a financial award to support the research. So this is worth some money, guys. And now you may start.
For introduction, let's start here and go around.
Okay. Hi, I'm Meg Gagliardi. I'm a civil engineering major with a music performance background.
I'm Andrew Gast. I'm a mathematics and computer science major.
I'm Monique Dalton, and I'm an electrical engineering major.
Ethan Ferraro, materials science and engineering major.
Michael Robinson, chemistry and psychology.
I'm Mac Walls. I'm majoring in chemical engineering and minoring in engineering leadership development.
And we are Team Music, or Methodology of Understanding Songs by Incorporating Computers. Representing us today are myself, Mike, and Ethan. So there's a large and growing amount of musical data, which creates the need to better organize and access this data. In response, many companies have created music recommendation services. Many of these services today rely heavily on ambiguous information, which prevents automated systems from creating completely objective and universally applicable recommendations. An objective method for measuring what allows songs to be perceived as similar would help add to the progression of this field. The main problem or gap upon which this team will focus is that information about the musicality of songs is largely being ignored. The existence of patterns that can be identified by people, such as music analysts, implies that these same patterns can be identified by computers using objective analysis. Defining musical traits objectively would remove ambiguity in applying musical theory and also create quantitative data which can be applied systematically in order to categorize songs. We hypothesize that if we can model music perception without ambiguity, then we can develop music theory models in order to predict and understand the perception of musical features. In addition to using our research to contribute to generalizable knowledge, we intend to fill a societal need. Consumers are unsatisfied with music recommendation services today. This is demonstrated by the recently launched music recommendation service program called Beats Music. Due to programs such as this being introduced, there must be a public need for new music recommendation services.
Thanks. Oh, that was timely. So, as Monique mentioned, there's, of course, these newer recommendation systems such as Beats Music, but there's some big names that have been floating around for a while now. These are fairly well known. We've got iTunes Genius from Apple, Pandora Internet Radio with their Music Genome Music Genome program, and finally Last.fm, which is a little more common in Europe than it is here in the States, but still certainly pertinent. These three systems I selected because they accomplish the same goal of music recommendation, but they go about it in importantly different ways. However, at their most basic level, they are all still metadata-based similarity engines, which is necessary because without using metadata, there's no real way to have an algorithmic recommendation system, unless you had somebody manually doing all of that. Anyways, iTunes Genius operates off of a series of algorithms that aren't made public but are based primarily on interactions between customers and their purchases, their listening counts in their iTunes libraries, and related information between users. So essentially you have a very large network of listening information that's used to predict likes based on listening trends. Pandora Internet Radio takes a slightly different look at it. Instead of having this collection of listening trend data from such a large body, they instead focus on implementing musical descriptors that are extracted by a team of music analysts. This is time consuming. It does take into account musical information, which, as Monique mentioned, is a big something that's really lacking with a lot of systems, but it's inefficient, it's a subjective interpretation, and so it's a system that could be improved upon. Finally, we have Last.fm, which also uses musical descriptors, but does this through user input. They vote on these musical tags to describe the song. Could be something like a genre, it could be a certain mood that they get from the song, and these tags are what are used to predict listening trends. So, metadata. The name itself, going by meta and data, it's essentially self-referential information. In the context that it's typically used with files, it's the information about the file, or in the case of a song, such as, we have an example here, stuff like the artist name, the year the song was released, the genre of the song, it's another important descriptor. So things like Pandora and Apple, iTunes Genius and Last.fm, they generate new sets of metadata that are used specifically for the recommendation process. There are many different types of metadata, but the only two that we'll be dealing with specifically are structural and descriptive metadata, because those are the most important for what we're trying to do with the recommendation system. Structural metadata will be things like the listening trends of users, because it preserves locality and frequency. And descriptive metadata will talk about the actual musical traits of the song. Descriptive metadata is, again, like the one displayed on screen. So we're not the first people to try to use computers to extract musical features. As you guys are well aware, there is a very healthy and vibrant community doing the same sort of thing. Audio signal processing allows us to extract features in terms that can be applied directly to musical trends. Some notable conferences such as DAFX deal with presentation of different methods and techniques used for this. And of course there's the competition Mirex that you mentioned just earlier. So,
Given this information, our research question is, how can music information within songs be efficiently incorporated into music recommendation services by predominantly using computational analysis? We expect that by eliminating ambiguity, we will enhance recommendations, therefore driving recommendations based on musical information itself.
so in order to do this, first and foremost, we're going to have to develop an efficient and automated method for extraction of musical features. We'll be doing this by examining and researching further different signal processing techniques, developing non-ambiguous music theory models. The non-ambiguity section is key to produce a more universally applicable music theory model, and we're going to try to integrate this with existing recommendation software. So this is all going to involve an extensive amount of research that we've been trying to slog through over this past year or so. It's been very enlightening. We've come a very, very long way, as was mentioned. And essentially the goal of our project isn't so much to edge out these other recommendation systems as to augment the available information that they're using for the recommendation process. We're not trying to say that using these musical features is going to be superior. We're just saying that it's a very large body of information that's mostly ignored currently.
And in order to access these features, of course, we need to perform signal processing to get at the very basic elements of these song files. The first way to go through this is with the pre-processing. Now, through our research, we found that the production of mill frequency capture coefficients, or MFCCs, tend to be the most frequently used. This is done through a reverse Fourier transform, which generates this sort of spectral graph, which you can then use to analyze the data. Several other scales we found include the Hertz scale, the Bark scale, and the ERB scale. However, they don't seem to be exactly as useful as the Mel scale. And after pre-processing, there's of course processing we need to get through, which comes in two predominantly useful varieties for this project in particular: frame level and block level. Frame level processing exists on millisecond-based increments, where the locality of these features is preserved. It can be enhanced, and each of the specific elements from within that millisecond byte can be taken out and analyzed. Block level, of course, is the other one, as I said, and it takes second chunks of these songs, these spectral graphs, and allows you to get overall analysis to create higher level features, which Ethan is going to get into.
So Mike mentioned these higher level features. Since frame and block level differ in that block can preserve locality information, which is important, we're defining 3 different levels of features that we'll be using to construct a sort of global feature vector, which will encompass a compressed version of all the information about the specific song for the recommendation purposes. The first level of feature is the most basic. It's a low-level feature. It refers to a specific instance in a song, which I'm referencing with a musical note here, but it would be a specific frame, so no locality information, just what's happening at that exact moment. The next level is mid-level. This involves trends and patterns, something like maybe a melodic motif or a progression throughout the song. And finally we have high-level features, and those are features that describe the song as a whole, so some sort of development throughout the song from start to finish, be it melodic, timbral, rhythmic, and that's what we'll be using to construct the feature vector.
Now, in order to do this, we can't just, write these algorithms and then throw thousands upon thousands of songs through them, because that'll just create this huge web of data that we have nothing to do with. In order to process this, we'll be implementing a machine learning algorithm which will sort and help to qualify these songs, so we can then later put in our qualifiers and descriptors so we can generate the recommendation system. However, there are some flaws with this idea of machine learning that we're going to implement. One specific example is the overfitting issue. As you can see on these graphs, overfitting is when your graph or your algorithm is over-optimized for a specific data set, which leads to issues such as the artist and album issue, where you select, say, the Beatles, and in your recommendation system, if this overfitting was not taken into account, you would just get the Beatles over and over again because it's so similar, obviously. And through that, we hope to combat this overfitting effect by implementing another nested machine learning, if you will.
So our project will contain two main parts, the first of which is the development of a music feature extraction and recommendation program. And we will start off this by focusing with pre-processing. We'll take the audio data and compute MFCCs, as Mike explained earlier. Then we'll take out or extract major musical elements from the music by processing the music using frame and block level methods. Then we'll assign numbers representing similarities to these features in order to use them for comparison and ultimately classification of the songs. And then we'll generate our recommendation. Our final product will be a music recommendation program where a user can input a song and the output generated will be a playlist of complementary songs. This will likely be integrated into an existing music recommendation service. The second main part of our project is using surveys and focus groups during the development of our product. This will serve multiple purposes, including improving the functionality of our program, discovering what musical aspects people themselves identify to be important in defining their preferences, refining methods of feature extraction, and discovering ultimately the success of our project. Overall, our project will have a quantitative analysis, which is our audio signal processing, and we will obtain qualitative results, which is the music information we obtain.
So there's a few things that we're not going to be able to take into account with this project just for the sake of feasibility and to not taking on some absurd measure. Firstly, human subjectivity will be something that influences our results from the survey that we can't expect to counter entirely. By asking the questions in the survey and the focus groups, we'll be able to anticipate them to some extent, but we won't be able to entirely. So stuff like, say we were talking about the Beatles earlier, maybe somebody puts in a 60s revival pop song from the modern era, and it generates something by the Beatles as output. If they, for some reason, hate the Beatles, just because they don't like the band or the genre or the whatever's associated with them, they will dislike that song, and we can't account for that prejudice. Secondly, there's variations in audio quality and performance type between different songs. Say, for example, a live version versus a studio version. A lot of emphasis has been placed on studio versions of songs recently, so a live version of a song might not receive the same feedback from the listener. This is something else that we won't be able to take into account, really, given that live performances of songs are typically very musically similar to the studio version. It's just aesthetic differences. And finally, of course, there's lyrical content. As important as lyrical content is in people's perception of music and their tastes, unfortunately, analyzing lyrical content would be an altogether different project, since lyrics are not technically a musical feature.
So, as you can see, we have our timeline up here. By fall of 2014, we hope to have our pilot study complete, which is going to be the first main step in creating our main recommendation service. And initially, we'll hope to have our framework down. By spring 2015, we'll be planning to present at Undergraduate Research Day with a predominantly finished product. We would still have to send out our final testing. And by fall of 2015, we hope to have it published, finalized, and released, as well as attend several signal processing music conferences. Our specific hope is to attend DAFX. And of course, by spring 2016, to have our thesis and defense complete. Our budget, the predominant cost we have here is for the attendance of DAFX. Other than that, we have some money allotted for pilot studies for incentive in order to have people actually do it. Access to resources would include mostly a music library, which we total to about $1,000, and the hardware, which includes server storage as well as a strong number crunching computer. around 2000.
So thank you guys for all coming out here today. Especially like to thank our mentor, Dr. Dhiraswamy, our librarian, Steve Henry, who couldn't make it, and the Gemstone program for providing us the opportunity to do this. But thank you all for listening.
All right. What we like to do first, traditionally, we like to let our outside experts take the lead in the conversation, and the conversation can go anywhere you wish. It can go towards what you've heard or what you wish you would have heard.
Yes, I'm recording it.
So, with the understanding that it is to help them to use that information to improve what they've done so far, to take that next step forward, and move further down that road of becoming the experts in this field, which is absolutely to me fascinating because I've been in total novice. So, anybody want to begin?
Well, I guess I'll ask some information questions, right? So this is presumably for recorded music, already recorded, I mean like professionally recorded and published and all that. And usually this kind of music has piles of metadata available from the recording studios, from the artists, so if you're gonna restrict yourself to that, as opposed to me grabbing a microphone and, just making a tool and saying, I want something I heard. What is the benefit of this? What is the extra that you're gonna get out of it?
So just to restate the question for clarification, what are we getting out of this information extraction from the song that isn't already there from the studio?
Yeah, because there's so much metadata available with iTunes. If I go and buy a record, or I put the artist's name.
So the information currently available tends to fall under the basic ones like you saw before, like a duration, artist name. Then you get into the ones that are more concerned with musical information, which is where we're hoping to increase the amount of information. Genre, mood, such as I mentioned with Last.fm and Pandora. The biggest inspiration, I guess, for this project was Pandora Internet Radio, because they sort of did something unique from the other recommendation systems by looking at actual distinct musical features from songs extracted by trained analysts. So this is all very real, very pertinent musical information. What we're trying to do is do that same sort of extraction, take out these musical features, but do it in a more efficient way, a less ambiguous way, and use it the same way that Pandora Internet Radio tried to make a recommendation system based on real musical information, not just things that people use to describe their mood or what they felt listening to the piece. So where it differs from studio metadata is the musical trends we'll be describing are very distinct things: melodic progressions, chords, types of rhythm, hopefully, if we can manage to, even things like timbral qualities, stuff that you won't find on the typical metadata collection.
Just to add on to that, the way, I'm not sure if you know this, but the way Pandora works is that they have trained analysts listen to a song and rate it, each of 400 different musical features from 1 to 10 of their presence in the song. So we basically think that it would be a lot more efficient and a lot more accurate if we could set up a computer program that did a similar thing, rather than having to have trained humans do it.
Do you want to follow up, or can I ask you
Yeah.
that? Yeah, so probably the most money I ever made in a short period of time when I was your age was I got a gig for, I think, 3 hours at $150 an hour to rate songs. And they played 10 seconds of each song. They were like olden goldies and like this and that, but it was basically a rock radio station that wanted to sort of, and I don't know why they picked me or some of the people they picked, but they just wanted, they only played a short snatch of the song, and you just had to give it. So it's quite different than Pandora's raters who are going through all these different features and analyzing it very carefully. This was like a gut response. Do you like it or don't you like it? And one thing that I would really be interested in, because there's a great set of papers by Robert Zatori and his colleagues where they do thrills and chills. So they basically do recordings from the brains of people while they're listening to music, and find out what really turns them on. And it turns out nucleus accumbens, which is involved in addiction, is one of many structures that actually gets activated when you get really excited by music. And so one thing, I just throw a crazy idea out, is that you could actually not only, because the question is, how do you validate this? How do you know you're successful? Well, people use it, let's say. But you might do a rating system where people actually said, no, this algorithm doesn't work for me. You just chose a whole bunch of musical selections after I input this and this and this that don't fit my profile at all. I didn't like them. And or you could actually increase your amount of money you're asking for the Gemstone team and do MRI and actually see what happens when someone listens to the music they've selected. See that? Yeah. But that's a little far out. But the real question is, not that far out. The question is, how do you rate? How do you judge success? How do you judge success of this product? When all said and done, okay, you're a brilliant team. You put this together. You come up with a whole bunch of acoustic descriptors. You got your program written. So now, great. What then? How do you know it's actually doing anything better than Pandora or any of these other products?
Okay. Well, that sounds very interesting actually, because we do actually have an MRI machine on campus, and we would need money though. But right now, what we are planning to do is through we're going to start with a pilot survey with actual people from campus, going through songs that we select and just rating them on a 1 to 5 scale, whether they like the little about 30-second snip of it. And how we generated this list of songs that they're going to be rated is by getting 10 songs from an online, or not an online service, an advertising service that has professionally developed music that hasn't been released to the public, so we don't want to use music that they might already have a history with that could affect their judgment. So we're going to get these 10 songs, pick 10 songs that seem to represent very different kind of musical styles, and put that through the machine, through our program, and try to get for each one song we put in the 2 recommended songs. So then for each one song we have the 2 out, and that'll give us a total of 30 songs with the 10 original and the 20 outputs. We'll mix those, make a randomized order, and have these individuals listen to them. From there, we're hoping to see that when an individual likes the song that we use as an input, that they also like the output songs, which they won't know whether they will have no awareness of these connections because they'll be randomized. Also, we hope to see that if they didn't like a song, they're probably not going to like they hopefully won't like the song that was output. So that's the hope now, to try to see if our program works.
If I can append something, we're confident in this system that we'll be developing because it relies heavily upon a music theoretical model. And so I guess you could say we're kind of taking on faith that music theory is a thing that works. And so we're going to try to emulate
Well,
that.
music theory works for music theorists.
And that's a very, very good point. But we're hoping that we're going to see an alignment of how people respond to the recommendations that are, or at least in these initial pilot studies, how people rank music and how our machine will cluster these pieces together.
So we're talking about people enjoying music, and the main goal is to, in the long term, to give people more access to pleasurable music, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So this isn't really a question so much as a thought, something to keep in mind, that the presentation is, and the project is based on the fact that acoustics drive pleasure that you get from music. But it seems, at least in music theory research, that it's repetition of acoustic features that it tends to drive pleasure you get from music. So people don't often like a song the first time they hear it so much as how much they like it the 4th or 5th or 6th or even 100th time that they've heard it. So repetition induces pleasure from
Up to a
music.
point. Up to a point.
Well,
Yeah, things like that.
reasonable repetition and over a reasonable time
Yeah.
frame.
Yeah.
So I just wonder if you've thought about experience-related factors that might drive pleasure.
Uh, So this is it actually for me is a little related to the question you asked with how they'll. So if it's a question of enjoyment and repetition is an important part of that, which it is, that's been proven, as you mentioned, and with the MRI studies where they show the pleasure centers, what we need to be able to do is detect what it is that's being enjoyed, what it is that's being repeated that is stimulating the brain in whatever fashion. So how to figure out if it works, how to determine if we can find what makes things pleasurable, what songs might be pleasurable. It's almost a question of accuracy versus precision. So what we're going to develop is, hopefully, because it's going to rely on quantitative musical information derived directly from the song, we'll be developing a very precise instrument. So the first time we fire this thing up, the first time we run through the surveys, I don't know where it's going to end up. Maybe we're shooting for here and we end up here, maybe we end up like in the other room. But what's important is that we get the same spot each time we try it unless we change the program. So this way, if we have consistent results, we can keep bringing it closer and closer and closer until we can reliably pick up on those repeated trends.
So if your system is phenomenally successful, and I'm an entrepreneurial composer, I really want to know what those details are. Because I'm going to compose a piece that has all of them in it. It's going to sell like hotcakes, right? I mean, it's going to be tremendously successful. If you have 27 descriptors, I want my piece I'm writing to have all 27 shoved in there, because I can get everybody. So where's the entrepreneurial side of your thought process as far as you identify these things to make everybody happier, but how you going to make a buck on it?
Sorry.
Well, interestingly enough, you suggested there will be these 27 descriptors, and then the entrepreneurial composer will be like, well, there are these 27 descriptors, and so I'm going to try and include all of these and such and such. But these descriptors are based on, at least in our program, these descriptors are going to be based on a individual user's tastes, individual user's corpus of music. And so some descriptors may be weighted differently. Some descriptors may be less important or more important. And depending on how much that descriptor pertains to a certain song compared with how much it is weighted or how heavily it is weighted in that individual's tastes will be just one of the determining factors in whether that song gets recommended to the person who we're talking about, the individual. So at least the way I see it, and I hope that it aligns with the rest of my team's perspectives, is that we're going to make a buck on this by having an individual, put in a little bit about their listening history. That should, hopefully that should be the only input that they have to give. And then from there, it'll be very easy for them to receive recommendations, and when they include more music in their library, let's call it, their corpus, they'll receive more recommendations, and it'll just build from there. And so hopefully that'll be a very personalized music experience that people will be attracted to.
Okay.
If I could just add very quickly, you presented the two different sides of it, measuring figuring out what's popular versus taking, all right, well, this is what's popular, so I'm going to make that. So sort of like engineering versus reverse engineering. Essentially what we're doing is we're creating a tool to measure something. So just like a ruler, you can use a ruler to measure how long a table is, or you can measure it to cut down a piece of wood for the right size of the table. It can work either way.
Okay. All right. Let's continue with questions. Suggestions?
I assume you did quite a bit of background work on what all these gigantic companies are doing, trying to get this done. The fact that it hasn't been done satisfactorily means it's really a tough problem, right?
Pretty tough.
So what is your explanation for that? Why do you think you'll succeed? You have something unique that you think they missed out? I mean, I know you have great guts, and I really admire you for that.
Part of it, I
And
would
unless
say.
you try, you won't learn anything, so.
You wanna go, Nick?
Yeah, part of it I would say is we're motivated by something other than money. We're motivated that we have experienced these recommendation systems and they do not satisfy us. We've especially been exploring them through this project, like in the aforementioned Beatles example. We tried putting in, trying to create a Beatles radio, and all we got was Beatles and Beatles cover bands. And so we're like, if these are these massive companies and their programs are not going as far as just we can conceive that they can go, then there must be some way we can approach this. And when we started to go further, we found that nobody is doing this, and there is this prevailing.
Nobody what?
Nobody is doing a non-subjective human input approach, like
Right.
humans defining.
No one's doing it who's published.
Everyone, yeah.
Nobody who's mainstream.
Yeah, none of the large published
Yeah.
companies that we've looked at.
Mhm.
And
That's
we think
because
that,
it's really hard.
yeah.
Honestly, I think the answer kind of lies in the question there because it's a sort of cost-benefit thing. The current model works, I mean, these guys are making bank. It's very commercially successful. They have no real reason to go backwards and say, okay, well, at square one, we're not including this straight from the song musical data. Why would we bother to do that if we're already functioning and working well? So the reason why we might be able to do it when they couldn't is because our bottom line is accomplishing the task rather than fitting a budget and getting a certain monetary output.
Thing is, they're satisfied with good enough to make a buck. We're not. We want to know why it ticks.
Why is it that you are of the opinion that acoustics drive music perception or musical features drive enjoyment you get from music versus my friends listening to this type of music, so I might like it better, so versus metadata?
Sorry, I know I keep answering a lot, but this is like, this one's the paper that I was, well, part of that is the human subjectivity thing that I mentioned before. That's not something that we're going to be able to take into account in this study. It is something that could be accounted for and anticipated in other studies, but that's not strictly what we're aiming at. So another example, again with the Beatles, a similar output could be the Rolling Stones. However, back in the day, for a lot of people, you were a Stones fan or you were a Beatles fan. You didn't like both, however similar they might be in some musical aspects. So the subjectivity part we can't account for, the prejudice we can't account for, but what we can account for are these musical features and how we know that they influence, like actual musical changes influence human musical perception. A good study for this was, I think it was 96, Harold Fisk wrote a paper, How Different is Different. And in this paper he demonstrates through very small, I think 15-second snippets of melody he composed, very slight changes he made, such as a key shift, maybe a melodic inversion in a certain part, rhythmic changes, stuff like that. And he just asked the listeners if it was a different piece than he played before, after an interim. So what that demonstrated is that there is a distinct perception in these musical changes. The more subtle ones don't necessarily register. That depends on your cultural upbringing in addition to your knowledge. But since there is an available change, something that's being detected, that does influence your perception of it.
Can I give an example that strikes me as sort of relevant to this? So if you look at classical compositions, you'll sometimes find huge differences in how conductors conduct the music.
Mm-hmm.
Same musical notes, right? You know, basically, musically, there are a lot of similarities. But for example, the duration of Beethoven's Ninth can be anywhere between something like 47 minutes and 29 minutes. I think it's the shortest recording. So you could really speed it up. That's a big difference in time. And you might like it because of the way the conductor's conducting it. You might like it because of a soloist. You might like it because of the sort of timing of it, right? There are a whole bunch of things that might go into it. If you take the same song and you have it sung by a different singer, or is it sung by, with different accompaniments, or different textures of. It's the same melody, which you might love, but it's coming out in a very different way. So, I guess one of the things is that you might have, independent of the acoustic descriptor, pleasure in a certain, melodic sequence. And so everything else will be quite different, but there might be some features which are the same. But what you guys are doing is, I'm not sure how you're going to weight the things that really matter to people versus all the things that they don't mind if it changes. Someone might say, well, I want Beethoven's Ninth no matter. I don't care if it's fast or short. Like Shihab here, he'll listen to it, right? He'll go for it. So the question is, what are you'll come up with a whole bunch of acoustic descriptors, but what are the things which are actually important for the person who's the listener? You're going to end up, in other words, with a lot of variables that probably don't make a lot of difference to the listener.
So to answer that, one of our planned ideas for the final program is a sort of way to choose the intervals in which, not intervals, but the variants in which you want similarity. So you could say, so for the melodic progression, for example, like you were saying, I want things within like 0.5 degrees of similarity. I don't want this to change very much at all.
Mm-hmm.
But everything else you could set to, say, arbitrarily 5, which is the maximum degree. That would set that all these qualifiers, as long as it was within 0.5 degrees of separation from that melodic progression, they would all contain it. However, everything else could change. But it's just that one factor that keeps it related.
And we're, like you were saying, how are we going to find out which are the features that matter? That's the biggest purpose, really, of the surveys, other than making sure that our program actually works the way we want it. We do know there's a lot of features, and right now we don't know, and we haven't been able to find research that really truly identifies which ones people find important. And that's what we're going to look for with some of our initial surveys.
You're going to pick out you're doing vocal and instrumental music, right?
Treating the voice as an instrument, yes.
Right, so are you going to try to distinguish between these things? In other words, somebody might like one vocalist covering a song and not another vocalist.
That would have to be.
That'd be timbre or something of that.
Yes,
the timbre quality of the voice.
Well, but
They have to combine it.
they're not using metadata.
But no metadata.
No, I know, but it
This
has
is
to
this is
just
a metadata
supplemented
free.
with metadata.
This is like a vegan diet.
No.
We're creating musical metadata where, because it's an algorithm-based recommendation system, it can't be free of metadata schema, otherwise they wouldn't be able to function. So,
To learn the whole culture is impossible.
I think we'd have to invite Dr. Fritz back as you progress and have him sort of look at.
For $150 an hour.
10 seconds.
But he only
We have that kind of budget.
But only 10 seconds because he's too expensive.
Building off of that, my question for you is, how did you explore, assess, and integrate scholarly resources into your proposal writing process?
Abby would go nuts right now.
Oh my goodness.
So, we've all done
It's
some
for the money.
serious research, but Abby's been an absolute champion.
Looking back, starting about, halfway through freshman year, I don't think any of us could have said what a Mel frequency capsule coefficient is, or even pronounced it. We have amassed, we have found and amassed so many papers that have actually shown us what these things are, that we can actually end up peeling through an entire paper with a jargon density more than, normal words, and completely understand it. It's amazing the things we've learned.
I mean, I just the machine learning and the signal processing and the mathematical side and computer science side of things. I mean, my favorite word is topology, and we found we found a bunch of articles on topology and just how to deal with getting all of this input, because you imagine this is big data we're working with. This is 27 features. I mean,
Big data.
Huh?
It's definitively big data.
Yeah,
and
it's
it's expanding.
And it's expanding. Exactly right. And so looking for novel ways to, or not necessarily novel, but new applications of, for example, topological methods to this huge, amount of data that we have, so that we don't have to necessarily, just brute force compute everything about it, but perhaps find ways to, compare that data qualitatively, and we've been using the words qualitatively and quantitatively enough, and in this sense I mean qualities about the data itself. And so just the amount of papers we've found on that topic alone, on machine learning and wielding this big data, has been incredible. I mean, self-organizing maps is just one example, taking high feature space and translating it into something we can manage while preserving that topological information. Very important.
And the library's resources have really been a godsend, the way that
Yes.
it's organized, because there are a lot of these words, especially like metadata, has been the biggest pain. There's so many different applications of them, and we're looking for just the one that's related to our field. So being able to search for keywords within just the databases in music or just the databases in computer science has made it a lot easier to figure out what words and phrases mean, rather than just trying to look them up in a dictionary.
And going off of that, at first, when we first tried to dive into the literature, we kind of landed face first at not understanding any, maybe every other word we could understand. So at first, our reading of literature was really focused on just understanding what these words meant. And then from there, we developed into looking at what other people have done and how we can build off of the work that they have done.
I believe our biggest 4-letter word was jargon when we were looking at all this literature, and just thankfully there was a large amount of it, and we were able to kind of decipher the jargon.
We got very good at consulting end of paper citations and working backwards.
Okay, excellent. Additional questions? They're not off the hot seat yet.
I think it's really impressive. The courage that it takes to actually to jump into this. I would have said it's hopeless, except for that you convince this advisor to also take you seriously and work with you on it. I think there's really some good hope. So congratulations, you are very persuasive.
I think in part it's our naivete that enabled this, because you get an expert walking in and saying okay, I need you to do this. Just, no, no, thank you. We walk and we're like, okay, so this is what we're trying to do, and we have no idea how to do any of it.
Yeah.
But in that sense, our knowledge of everything you need to know to do this is equal. So we're starting on even footing, even if that's at zero.
So my sort of response to this is, when they came to me, I thought it would be an interesting project, and they learn a lot. So even if they succeed, great. Even if they don't succeed, it's a big success, because you would have learned a lot. And so I think just keep pushing.
There's no doubt.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Does the team have any questions that have been spawned based on this conversation you want to throw back at us collectively? You get about 3 seconds to come up with one.
No pressure.
Just I guess a question about, because I know the Gemstone program, and correct me if I'm wrong, please do.
I usually do.
Either funds or partially funds attendance of conferences?
We have some limited funding for if you're going to attend and present.
Yep.
And present,
Yes. Mhm.
okay, and you're on the official program for the conference, we will help get you there. $14,000 is a pretty big price tag.
Right.
I saw that in my.
We would not ask
yeah.
for all of that.
You're a wise person.
That would be
Yeah, that's $14,000. That's plane tickets.
That's the most
because
expensive country in the world.
none of the conferences we've looked at are anywhere close.
Maybe you want to take your backpack. Use a tent.
Bottled water and some chips.
So I
would
arrange a
encourage you to look
conference in
for-
DC for you.
Yeah, exactly.
Don't count on the program to fund all of
Right.
your travel.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of teams spend a lot of energy searching for outside funding sources. And they're everywhere from professional organizations to philanthropic organizations to wherever, crowdsource it, I don't know. But you can, wherever you want to get it from, but we will try to send people. We have sent teams to expensive conferences, and we say, okay, now 2 people can go, pick. You can't send 7, we can send 2. That's usually something like that happens. And sometimes 2 people go, and sometimes they micro crowdsource the money, and everybody goes. So, yeah, we love to see it happen, as long as you're presenting. And if you get to the point where you're publishing, we definitely will underwrite publication costs, because that is so important.
One thing I think would be helpful to hear more about is how the studies were being done using the MRIs. If you could kind of just give more of a summary on how that process was being done.
So I think we should have, they're in the same building as we have our mentor meetings in.
Yeah.
And if a time is sort of convenient for them, we can have you folks first visit their lab and also maybe get them to present a couple of things they do, just so that it'll broaden your...
That'd be great. Yeah.
That'd be excellent.
I mean, this just goes to show that our research isn't done entirely, because I am personally very interested in Dr. Sharma's features, and since they were recently
I
featured.
just heard it.
But I am very
It's the
interested.
first I know about it.
Well, that's great. Communication 2 ways.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, any other follow-up, wrap-up questions or words of advice? If not, we're going to wrap up and say thank you very much, Team Music.
Thank you.
And thank